How you doing?
Come and ride along with Hawkeye and Jeannie on their journey, visiting cities, communities, towns, hot springs, Timbuktu, a few nude beaches, and other places of interest to determine what is really going on during the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hawkeye and Jeannie are a couple of old coots who are still out there having fun. Then they will report back to you with these videos. This is what Hawkeye's Tales and Trails is all about.
You know?
Yeah.
I am Calafia, the hostess for Hawkeye's Tales and Trails. A little about myself. I am a retired pagan warrior queen who ruled over a kingdom of black women living on the island of California, an island off the coast of Asia, where I was convinced to raise an army of women warriors, then sail away from the island of California with a large flock of trained griffins accompanied by my husband, Talank. The Californias, a region of North America encompassing the U.S. state of California, and the Mexican states of Baja California, and Baja California Sur, take their name from Calafia, and my kingdom. Read more about my story in the novel entitled Los Sergas de Esplandian, or The Adventures of Esplandian, written by Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo.
Thank you for tuning to AM 1610, the Manzanar National Historic Site Travelers Information Station. Over 11,000 people of Japanese ancestry were confined at Manzanar during World War II. 2/3 of them were U.S. citizens. Congress established Manzanar National Historic Site to tell their stories and other local history. Manzanar is located west of Highway 395. Turn west on Manzanar Reward Road and follow the sign. Admission is free. The Visitor Center is open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 11 to 4, and features extensive exhibits, restrooms, and bookstore. Nearby, a mess hall and barracks house exhibits about the challenges and changes Japanese Americans faced at Manzanar. These reconstructed buildings are open 7:30 to 3 daily. You can drive a 3-mile tour road to see numerous Japanese gardens, the cemetery, and historic orchards. Feel free to explore the site on foot. These grounds are open daily during daylight hours. Manzanar is protected by federal law. Do not collect or disturb anything and drive only on the designated tour road. We invite you to complement your Manzanar experience by visiting the Eastern California Museum, located 6 miles north in Independence. It is open 10 to 5 daily. Thank you for listening, and please have a safe and enjoyable trip.
This is going to be... You thought he was real?
Yeah, I did. Alright, we gotta show the viewers here.
This is like if you were coming in.
Yeah. Police.
Episode 90 is about how wars will screw up a happy home. I know firsthand. The current event in Ukraine is a prime example. Tell me what you think about this. You may have already seen the movie. The United States during World War II had about 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, most of whom lived on the Pacific coast. They were forcibly relocated and incarcerated in concentration camps in the western interior of the country. Approximately 2/3 of the internees were United States citizens. These actions were issued by President Franklin D. Roosevelt via executive order shortly after Imperial Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Of the 127,000 Japanese Americans who were living in the continental United States at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, about 112,000 resided on the West Coast.
Block 2. Make it sound like prison. It was prison.
It was a prison.
Block 8. How many blocks were there?
I think about 30, 32.
In each block house, so many.
Yeah, a couple hundred.
7.
About 80,000 were Nisei, literal translation, second generation, American-born Japanese with U.S. citizenship, and Sansei, third generation, the children of Nisei. The rest were Issei, first generation, immigrants born in Japan who were ineligible for U.S. citizenship under U.S. law. Japanese Americans were placed in concentration camps based on local population concentrations and regional politics. More than 112,000 Japanese Americans who were living on the West Coast were interned in camps which were located in its interior.
Come back and take control.
However, in Hawaii, which was under martial law, where 150,000 plus Japanese Americans composed over one-third of the territory's population, only 1,200 to 1,800 were also interned.
Grabbing my hand. That a baseball field still kind of outline.
Yeah. Yeah, Japanese like baseball.
The internment is considered to have been a manifestation of racism, though it was implemented to mitigate a security risk which Japanese Americans were believed to pose. The scale of the internment in proportion to the size of the Japanese American population far surpassed similar measures which were undertaken against German and Italian Americans, who were mostly non-citizens. California defined anyone with 1/16 or more Japanese lineage as a person who should be interned. Colonel Carl Bendetson, the architect of the program, went so far as to say that anyone with one drop of Japanese blood qualified. Roosevelt authorized Executive Order 9066, issued 2 months after Pearl Harbor, which allowed regional military commanders to designate military areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. Although the executive order did not mention Japanese Americans, this authority was used to declare that all people of Japanese ancestry were required to leave Alaska and the military exclusion zones from all of California and parts of Oregon, Washington, and Arizona, with the exception of those internees who were being held in government camps. The internees were not only people of Japanese ancestry, they also included a relatively small number, though still totaling well over 10,000, of people of German and Italian ancestry, as well as Germans who were expelled from Latin America and deported to the U.S. Approximately 5,000 Japanese Americans relocated outside the exclusion zone before March 1942, while some 5,500 community leaders had been arrested immediately after the Pearl Harbor attack and thus were already in custody. The United States Census Bureau assisted the internment efforts by providing specific individual census data on Japanese Americans. The Bureau denied its role for decades despite scholarly evidence to the contrary, and its role became more widely acknowledged by 2007. In its 1944 decision Korematsu v. United States, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the removals under the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. The court limited its decision to the validity of the exclusion orders, avoiding the issue of the incarceration of U.S. citizens without due process, but ruled on the same day in Ex Parte Endo that a loyal citizen could not be detained, which began their release. The day before the Korematsu and Endo rulings were made public, the exclusion orders were rescinded. In the 1980s, under mounting pressure from the Japanese American Citizens League and redress organizations, President Jimmy Carter opened an investigation to determine whether the decision to put Japanese Americans into concentration camps had been justified by the government.
Was the site of the hospital.
He appointed the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians to investigate the camps. In 1983, the Commission's report, Personal Justice Denied, found little evidence of Japanese disloyalty at the time and concluded that the incarceration had been the product of racism. It recommended that the government pay reparations to the internees. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which officially apologized for the internment on behalf of the U.S. government and authorized a payment of $20,000, equivalent to $44,000 in 2020, to each former internee who was still alive when the act was passed. The legislation admitted that government actions were based on race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. By 1992, the U.S. government eventually disbursed more than $1.6 billion, equivalent to $3.5 billion in 2020, in reparations to 82,219 Japanese Americans who had been interned. Manzanar is the site of one of 10 American concentration camps, where more than 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II from March 1942 to November 1945. It is located at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California's Owens Valley, between the towns of Lone Pine to the south and Independence to the north, approximately 230 miles north of Los Angeles. Manzanar means apple orchard in Spanish. The Manzanar National Historic Site, which preserves and interprets the legacy of Japanese American incarceration in the United States, was identified by the United States National Park Service as the best preserved of the 10 former campsites. Since the last of those incarcerated left in 1945, former detainees and others have worked to protect Manzanar and to establish it as a National Historic Site to ensure that the history of the site, along with the stories of those who were incarcerated there, is recorded for current and future generations. The primary focus is the Japanese American incarceration era, as specified in the legislation that created the Manzanar National Historic Site. Like we said, war is not healthy for children and other living things.
How you doing?
Hopefully the Ukraine people will get their justice someday. All the information is deemed to be reliable. However, there is no guarantee that it is. A today or later. Yeah, I am bummed. I hope that you are having a fantastic day.
Probably back in the day they had two gates here.